Hi, I'm Pete. I've been here at the San Antonio Zoo for 8 years, and I'm a keeper with the whooping cranes that we're going to talk about today. And so we have some goodies here for the cranes here, and to show you what they eat in captivity at least. They're omnivorous, so we have some crickets, some meat like this. They love those. They love waxworms, and they love mealworms. And these birds, a lot of them do like peanuts. I don't think this pair likes peanuts too much, but they do tend to like grapes. So I'm going to toss a few out, and I'm very surprised. These birds, well, this is the male here, and the female's down there, and he is a little aggressive, and so he's always following me around, and I'm surprised the female's not down here, so we'll see what she does. Probably throw him some food and see what happens here. Okay, by the way, this is Madison, and the other bird is called Patty. And Madison's been here his whole life. He was actually hatched here in 2005, so he's 15 years old. And Patty was hatched in 2010 up in Maryland at the Texas Wildlife Research Center. And she's been here about 6 months. And so soon after quarantine, etc., she was moved down here to this nice new big exhibit. And so they're very young birds. They live quite a long time in captivity. And so we can only hope that they breed at some point in the future. So let's see if he eats grape. He probably won't because he's focused on me, actually. Take a grape. Plus the grass is very tall. Take a grape. There he goes. He's got the good feeding behavior. Let's see what he does with crickets. Want a cricket? Oh, here comes the female. Okay, Patty, eat a cricket. There you go. You can't get too close to this young man because he's, like I say, he's kind of aggressive, and he will stab you with that big beak. And that's what his beak is for feeding, and also for defense. And he is all too willing to use it for defense against me. But we have a great river in this exhibit, and they're tall, wading birds, so they like to get in the water, and that beak really aids them in picking up fish or crawdads that we have here. Okay, we're doing a good job here. Come on, get one, Patty. Let's see what they do with waxworms. See if they like those. Okay, guys. They don't always see them. Try it, Patty. So they're very, very tall birds. There's only two types of cranes in North America, the whooping crane and the sandhill crane. And he's the tallest bird in North America. And there's 14 species of these cranes, so we have several, not just the... I said he was hatched here. We still have the parents down on the other side of the zoo down here, and their names are Tarzan and Jane. And we've had them for quite a long time. They can live up to maybe, I guess in captivity, about 40 years. In wildlife, not so much, maybe about 25 years would be pretty much the limit for them. So, of course, in the zoo you have your veterinarians and all this to take care of them. So much the better. So real tall birds, you can see here, it's kind of a rough idea of what they might live in. They're from Aransas Wildlife Refuge, where they live, so they're Texas birds. And they spend the winter here. And of course the grasses are pretty tall, so they want that height so they can see far away for predators and also other cranes and whatever they're looking at out there. And so that's what the height is for. The long legs so they can wade in this water, which they do all the time over here. They catch fish, even in captivity. And they catch, I think I said, crawdads also. Another thing you might notice is if I walked away, they might do it, but they'll call very, very loudly. They have a super loud call where it goes on for a couple miles, and that's because of a long trachea or windpipe, and it's coiled under their sternum, and it's about 5 feet long. and that's something a lot of birds don't have. And that allows them to communicate with each other in distant areas. They also live in Canada because what they do is migrate. They'll spend the winter down here in Texas and then have to go about 2,000 miles or so to central Canada, to Wood Buffalo National Park up in Canada. It's a little over 2,000. And so every year a wild bird would have to fly 2,000 up and 2,000 back in 1 year. So that's 4,000 miles. That's kind of hard to do. So what they have to aid them in that are these big wings. They're about 7.5 feet wide. They got a lot of lift in the air. Really fantastic to look at if you've ever seen pictures or video. Unfortunately, you can't see these wings. If they lift them, they have been trimmed because we don't want them to fly away from here. And but what they have is an extra aid other than just their big wings, is they have these hollow bones, which all these birds have, and they have these air sacs for the lungs, and as they grow as little chicks, these air sacs grow into these spaces of the bone and fills up, and that allows them to receive oxygen. And so the arrangement of the air sacs can be opposite from each other, and so that way they can actually breathe when you inhale and exhale. So that's really, really different for a lot of animals. There you go, Patty. There you go, get a cricket. I think they'll be doing this all day. All right, these birds are young. They've only been together about 6 months. We would love if they bred because that's what we've done it in the past with a lot of birds here that we've had. We don't think they're going to breed this year, but they have built some nests across the river, way on the far side by the banana trees down there. It looked like Patty was scoping out a little area for a little nest. We threw some greenery over there for a nest, and then a little later, this is all in March. Then she came back and started building a nest on this far end, at the far end of the exhibit. And so we threw more greenery over there, and they've shown some breeding behavior. And so it'd be great if they did something, but I think they're too new, and it may take several years, if ever, that they might do something in that regard. So birds in the wild will build their nests up in Canada, in these marshy areas, a lot of water. They put the grass on top of the marshy area, all the water, and they'll lay 1 or 2 eggs at a time. These eggs are pretty good size. They're about 4 inches long, by, I guess, 2.5 inches, something like that. And typically only one bird survives at a time, which is unfortunate because there's not that many birds out there. But in this case, we might take the egg from the nest and take it to an incubator if we need to, or we might just leave it and let them brood the birds themselves. It takes 29 to 31 days to hatch, and both birds sit on the nest for as long as they're broody. And when the birds hatch, then they will both feed them with their beak. They'll feed the little guy some insects, grasshoppers, dragonflies, whatever they can catch. So they have kind of a insect diet for a while. So in the wild, these guys will eat everything from grains to crabs, crustaceans, different crustaceans, fish, reptiles, amphibians, whatever you can catch in the water. It's relatively small. But down in Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, they have mainly blue crabs that they eat. And they're pretty good sized crabs, and they love those things. So that's again why they have those big beaks. So, let me throw them some more crickets.
We've got a couple questions for you.
Okay.
Angelique would like to know if they can swim.
They cannot swim. They have those long legs to get through the shallow water, but if the water gets too deep, I've seen some other other cranes go in the water and they may maybe float, but I wouldn't guarantee that. They're not swimmers by nature, no.
Sandy would like to know how old they are.
Yes, okay, the male, Madison, is 15 years old, and Patty is 10 years old, which is very young for these birds. They'll live to be 40.
And then I have to just give you a little shout out. It sounds like you've got some family watching you. Catherine commented, sending love from Caitlin, Harry, Maria, Hazel, and JoJo. They're
Super.
so excited to see their papa. Hi.
So, education is a big part of our zoo mission. Conservation is another mission of the zoo. So, what we have is a great program in regards to conservation. We've had birds from the very beginning that it was important to even think about whooping cranes out in the wild. Back before the Europeans got here in North America, there used to be there wasn't really that many, 100,000 birds in North America, and then by 1870 there's only about 1,300 left. And why? Well, because of the change of habitat. The marshes maybe were taken over by some of the settlers, etc. But also a lot of hunting was involved, and I'm sure that took a real toll on them. So anyway, by 1940s there's only like 21 birds. Oh, there they go. They're very aggressive too. I think I mentioned that. They're scaring away those other egrets down there. And then they do a unison call. They're all excited that they did something good for themselves. And so they're showing their pride. It's unfortunate we couldn't get the long flight feathers. When they ran, you could only see the other secondary feathers because we don't want them flying away. So anyway, it got down to 21 birds in the 1940s. So some ornithologists began to think, well, we need to do something about the situation. We don't want them to go extinct totally, like a lot of animals have over the years. And so what they did was they tried to raise them in captivity. And so by 1950, a man named Robert Allen, was actually connected with procuring some birds. And if I remember the names, they were Josephine and Crip. And they had these parents over in Audubon Zoo. And that was the first hatch. He's trying to get on too close. Here, get a cricket. So they had their first hatch over there, and they started learning about how to raise these things and how to take care of them and how to breed them, etc. So time went on. 1950, they had same Robert Allen, and that was 1950 with Audubon. But then in the 60s, Robert Allen again was on TV one time, and he was able to kind of capture the public's attention with whooping cranes, and he tried to encourage the care of whooping cranes and maybe somehow donating money or whatever, become interested in them so they might be able to carry on a breeding program. So by the 60s, they also had some birds that were picked up from Aransas and brought over here to San Antonio Zoo, and her name was Rosie. And so she was paired up with Crip from the Audubon Zoo, and they actually produced a young chick named Tex. I don't know how they got that name. So Tex was the first bird that was hatched in San Antonio Zoo, and not the last, because we've done quite well over the years. And so this is under the authority of George Archibald from the International Crane Foundation, and he tried to develop some techniques so they could breed them routinely. And so that's what happened with him, and he was able to have a great deal of success. But time went on into the 90s, and we had cranes. We had a lot of cranes over those years. And finally, in the late 90s, we had a couple pair of birds, and we decided to use some of those techniques and even perfect them to where we could artificially inseminate the females to make sure they laid fertile eggs, because a lot of times we'd have eggs, but they wouldn't necessarily be fertile over the years. And so through the 90s, through the 2000s, they did quite well with this. And so it turned out that the San Antonio Zoo was able to take some birds, 7 of them as a matter of fact, to a new outfit that was trying to start a second population in Florida, in the eastern half of Florida. So that's what they did. And then they had another organization called Migration, what was it called? I'm drawing a blank on that one. Something migration, but it was a group that was devoted to send down birds to Florida again that would go from Florida to Wisconsin back and forth. So we sent 10 eggs, fertile eggs, over to them, and they utilized them in their population. And when these guys would be hatching, they'd actually use an ultralight aircraft, and they'd fly these guys from Wisconsin down to Texas and back and forth, and teach them the route so they could migrate eventually on their own. So that's what happened. And so we've been a great zoo in regards to not only just maintaining populations of the zoo, which is great for education, but also sending them out in the wild. So the numbers have been skyrocketing. We started with 21 back in 1941, and then it even dipped lower than that around the 60s with Rosie. It was only like 16 at that point. And then with all this activity from the different organizations, right today they have about 850 birds, 500 in Aransas, and then about 160 in captivity. And then they also have a non-migratory population in Florida. And then we also have a migratory population in Florida. And that Florida group that's migratory they go from Texas up to Wisconsin, back and forth. So we're real proud of that achievement. In fact, we even got an award a few years ago at our kind of lifetime achievement in all our hard work with these whooping cranes over the years. And we've really done a great job. So, we want people to understand, what they are, and see them and appreciate them and care for them and want to do something for them, because we just can't lose a wonderful bird like this for forever. So if you can donate to different organizations and just care about the situation, and just, even politically, maybe you might influence your congressman, etc. So
I've got a few more questions for you. This one's a 3-parter. We're going to put them all together. Can you explain how you tell the difference between the male and the female? And then Natasha would like to know if they have a mating ritual, and how many eggs do they lay and hatch at a time?
Okay, well, they are the same. They look exactly the same. There's no difference in them except maybe a weight. There's probably a couple pounds weight difference. I know he weighs 15 pounds and he weighs, or she weighs 12 pounds. So there's 3-pound difference between them. As far as rituals, every bird has very stereotypical rituals they go through during breeding. And what that does is kind of encourage the hormones to synchronize with one another, so they do everything at the right time, and results in a nice fertile egg. And so what they do is they have an elaborate dance, and you've got to see it on camera somewhere, or you can see some of it out here, some of these birds. But they'll bow, and then they'll bow with their necks, and they'll pick up sticks and throw sticks, and they'll bend their necks back. And at the very end of the whole elaborate ritual, the male will follow the female and walk down kind of in unison. They'll have their heads raised, they'll be calling, all excited, and they'll have their beaks up in the air. And then at that point, they do their thing and hopefully result in a great egg. You get about 1 or 2 eggs at a time on a nest, and it takes, again, 29, 31 days to hatch. And and then it takes about 6 to 8 months actually to quit the kind of the baby stage where they're feeding them those insects and things, and of course eventually they can pick up on their own. But the parents are very, very important over this time frame, and then after about a year they're considered pretty much adult. And by the way, again, their diet changes. I was just thinking of their migratory habits. They have to fly up to Canada, then come back down. Well, there's a whole lot of states between here and there, and they don't just fly over all these states. They're landing and doing stopovers all the time. So they will stop in like Kentucky or Tennessee or Oklahoma. Oklahoma has a whole bunch of them. And there's wheat and barley and corn that they eat. So they go from a blue crab diet, where maybe when they're young they have the insect diet, then it goes to a blue crab and crustaceans and all this other stuff, and snails and things they can catch, and then it goes to this highly grain diet. And of course then we even feed them grapes in captivity, so they're very, very able to have different diets at different times. These guys were finally declared endangered species back in the 60s, and so again they had probably 60 birds, or probably less than that at that time, and so again they've raised their numbers up to way over 800. So we've got a really good outlook on these guys. They're increasing every year, and so it's just great to see. So I think what we would do is hopefully you come out here as soon as we can and actually see the birds in person, because on video they look great, but if you actually see them move around and eat and walk and go fishing and things, you really get to know the bird. It's really exciting to see. So I hope you all come by soon. So thanks for listening. And bye, Catherine.